Bisaya ba yan?
Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to start in just a few minutes. We're just waiting for Dr. Anita to be in the chat room. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our features conversation. This afternoon, there will be a paper presentation on features thinking, and our moderator for this features conversation is Dr. Alex Brillantes, and our reactor is Dr. Anita Kelleher from Australia. So to start with, I would like to welcome Dr. Alex Brillantes for his PowerPoint presentation on contextualizing features thinking in the Philippines. Sir Alex. Sir Alex, can you fix your audio, please? Your audio, please, Sir Alex. There you go.
Okay, fine. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
We can hear you now, Sir Alex. Can you proceed?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you, Dr. Lisan. Good afternoon to all of you. I was just looking at the list, and we have participants from as far as Cambodia, but of course, locally, Iloilo, Leyte, Ting Lucero, a good friend, Gretchen from Baguio, etc., etc. We cannot greet all of you, but it's so nice to have all of you guys. And as you know, this is the second major activity of the Futures Thinking Society, headed no less by Dr. Lisan Kalina, who's Perante Kalina, was also the president of the Philippine Society for Public Administration. And I would like to congratulate them for organizing this. What I did when Dr. Lisan asked me to prepare for this, I just prepared, if you don't mind, just to contextualize this about 4 slides, you know, on futures thinking. And if I might ask my colleague Celine to help me, please. So Celine, do you mind putting up the first slide? It will just be about 4 slides. And what I would like to say, dear friends, is the idea of futures thinking. You put on slide. Put on the first slide, Celine. The idea of futures thinking, yeah, is really something that is not new. If you look at it, next slide. Next slide, Celine. Okay. A good friend of mine, his name is Gil Santos. He's one of the founders of the Philippine Futuristic Society. And it was in the mid-80s, I think, invited me. They are based at the Asian Institute of Management. And if you recall, during the launching last week of this movement or this society headed by Dr. Lisan and Sherman and G and this, I also referred to future societies, Philippines origins in AIM. But even before that, some of you were with us, we talked about it as being oriented into this futuristics really in Honolulu in Hawaii with Sohail, Inayatullah, and of course, Jim Dator. Anyway, I was going over the material of Hill, a good friend, and these are what he says. What characteristics of a futuristic person? He has a very nice presentation which you could easily see on YouTube, and I know Hill won't mind me using this because I'm obviously recognizing his. He says that all of us in the movement of futures thinking, whether you're new, whether you're old, it might be good for us to have these qualities according to Hill Santos. First is we're an optimist. Siyempre, we are optimists in the sense that we want to know the future. You really can't be a pessimist in that sense because you want to have a better future, right? Number two, maturity in age and experience to be able to render stable, emotion-free judgments. Stable and emotion-free, because it's very difficult if we let our emotions, our personal ideologies, if you may, decide on what we want to look at. In that sense, this Hill Santos mentioned as a level of maturity in age and experience. Not necessarily perhaps age, but perhaps experience. But maturity is the whole point there. The third, analytical and critical mind. Hill says, it's so easy, napakadali po to ask what, where, and when. But he suggests we need to ask why. How did this thing start? When we look at certain events, how did this thing start? Why was it there in the first place? Why was there such a development? And in my own discussions with my classes, some of you I think are in my classes, we always want to ask what is the question behind the question. Not bakit nangyayari po ito. So a future thinking is able to look beyond what we see. The third is, the fourth rather, is really have a well-grounded perspective, experience. So one has to be multi-disciplinary, multi-perspective. And Hill says you should be somehow grounded in politics, economics, social science, technology and environment. That's information technology and environment. Interdisciplinary, well-rounded. And then the next slide, Leslyn, talks about the two other aspects of two other qualities of a futuristic person. Celine, be an effective communicator. In other words, it speaks for itself. Be an effective communicator. And he talks about when we communicate, we are not tautologous, able to put things succinctly, briefly, and targeted, and be open to deal with reality. Geography, politics, religion, work in harmony with the environment. So these are what he says are the characteristics of a futuristic person. And the last one, he says, is think global, act local. I was very pleased when I saw this because in the next slide, Dr. Lisan and I, Celine, Dr. Lisan and I, and some of our colleagues, including a colleague of mine, Maris Fernandez, we were working on this paradigm. The next slide talks about this. If you look at this book, there is some convergences between what Dr. Hill Santos mentions. Not yet, the slide before that, Celine, and that will be the last slide. The framework, Celine, that one. We've always talked about reforms in governance. And if you look at it, there is this importance of leadership, the importance of citizen engagement, the importance of values. And that's what we're going to talk about. But the outer circle talks about the importance of communication. And in the left side, you would see, or that would be on your left side, the importance of thinking global and acting local. I was quite pleased when I saw the presentation of Hill Santos because there are some convergences. And today's session is very, very important because as discussed by our organizers, we now have to look at changing the mindsets. And if you look at this slide, I also shared this slide before, but one slide. I've used this many times, and even the Senate. If you look at it, a very, very important part of reform. We're talking about reform for futures thinking. Important is, yes, we can change laws, we can change institutions. It's the metaphor here is the what do you call this now? The metaphor there is this
Tip of the iceberg.
Iceberg. I'm sorry, iceberg. I was about to say tip of the ice cream, but tip of the iceberg. If you look at it po, there are things that we see, but in today's discussion po, very, very important things that we don't see are changing the mindsets, changing the rule, changing the attitudes, thinking behaviors. And that's what's very, very important. And I think that is our theme for today, changing our mindsets towards futures thinking. And as you all know in our discussions last time, Senator Pia Cayetano mentions this, Dr. Lisan mentions this, sometimes we just don't think beyond what is here now. Very reactive po tayo. And the whole discipline of futures thinking is really looking forward, as Gil Santos mentions, not just looking at the what, but looking at the why, asking the question behind the question. So it's within that context po that we are now very happy to welcome all of you. We have four very distinguished speakers on futures thinking, young people, but certainly very, very bright, four brilliant people. I've had the privilege of having worked with them, and I've learned so much from them. From left to right, what I'll do is I'll just introduce them now, then later on I'll call them one by one. The first is no less than our prime mover in several of our movements now, Dr. Lisan Pirante-Calina. She's the president of Phil Futures and senior vice president and dean of Development Academy of the Philippines Graduate School and president of PSPA. And I've known her through the years. She's very brilliant. She's taken her doctorate from the University of the Philippines and has had a lot of experience here and abroad, including, of course, having presented papers at the United Nations and others. Okay. Our next speaker, whom I've had the privilege to get to know, is Professor Sherman Cruz. He's a colleague of mine from the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii, where I myself did some studies. He's the vice president of Phil Futures and the director of Center for Engaged Foresight, who will talk to us about Mind the Future, rewiring our perspectives from the world after. Dr. Lisan will talk about futures thinking, shaping futures development through policy foresight, emerging initiatives for the Philippine government. So Lisan will talk about futures thinking, but she'll talk about initiatives in Philippine government. As we say in Filipino, ilalanding po niya sa Pilipinas. Professor Sherman will talk about minding the future, rewinding the perspectives from the world after. And it's nice to meet Sherman again. And the third one, another very brilliant fellow. He has his doctorate from SKKU, Songkyungkwan University, one of the top schools of Korea. He's right now the director of studies of the University of the Philippines National College of Public Administration and is corporate secretary of Phil Futures. No, he is none other than Dr. Regio Gadan. Like myself, we're both from the north, but equally, it just coincidentally, he was with Isabela State University at one point, but he went to SKKU in Korea and came back and got one of the best marks when he finished his doctorate. And we're very happy he's with us today and also the University of the Philippines. And finally, another very young guy, not really very young, but young fellow, really, but equally smart and brilliant. We're working together on a project on futures thinking in education. He's none other than Professor Jerisa Del Flores. He's the director of the Center for Leadership, Citizenship, and Democracy of UP and CIPAG. It is a center that focuses on leadership issues, and it's a center that provides services to the different agencies of the government. Right now, they have a project with the Department of Agriculture and among others. And right now, Professor Flores is also working with the team for the futures thinking with the Department of Education. So we have an exciting time. I'm really so excited about this. Four very young and brilliant speakers. So with that, and I think they all possess, in spite of their youth, they all possess the 7 qualities of a futures thinking leader, if I might say. So I'd like now to first and foremost introduce our president, Dr. Lisan Pirante-Calina, president of Phil Futures and also PSPA, and also be the dean of the Development Academy of the Philippines Graduate School for Graduate School. Dr. Lisan, please.
Thank you very much, Sir Alex, for your kind words. My paper will delve into my screen PowerPoint presentation. Can you see it now? Okay, there you go.
You're muted.
Okay, all right. Am I muted? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, everyone? Sir Alex?
Yes, go ahead, Dean. Can hear you.
Okay. Sorry for that. All right. Okay, so this is my presentation. It's quite an animated one. Okay, so first page lang yan. All right, so this is about the emerging initiatives for the Philippine government. Here, I'm using features thinking as a tool in order for us to shape our feature development. Right. So for the objectives, actually, this presentation is part of a bigger paper that I am writing right now. That's why the paper will delve into the evolution and development of features thinking in the field of public management as management and leadership frameworks. And also, this paper will look into the operationalization of these frameworks by using features and foresight tools in the public sector. And because of the 21st century era or the knowledge era, it's important for us now to create the future in order to shape our development through policy foresight and knowledge creating theory. I'll explain later why policy foresight and knowledge creating theory. And likewise, this paper will provide handles for decision makers. Why do we need handles for decision makers? Because this is an evidence-based policy making. And lastly, the presentation will provide forward-looking initiatives for the Philippine government by taking into consideration alternative scenarios and some probabilities. So my next question is, can we create our own feature? So if you say yes, then I'd like to challenge you to let's think about our feature and how are we going to do that? No? So we will use features thinking as a field of study and as a field and as a practice. Okay, this one is a metaphor. What we call Black Swan. So Black Swan theory was introduced by Nassim Taleb. It's a metaphor for an event that is unpredictable and unexpected with massive impact. So for Taleb, who is a finance professor and a former Wall Street trader and author of many books, there are three attributes common to Black Swan events. First, it's unpredictable to the observer. And after the event has occurred, it has widespread ramifications. And then from the perspective of the observer, it's explainable and predictable. And these are some of the examples Taleb identified as Black Swan events, but he underscored the point that the Black Swan event depends upon the observer. And based on my rapid research, these are some of the Black Swan events from 1997 to 2019. But then the COVID-19 pandemic is not considered as a Black Swan event. And there's a debate on that. And many futurists and foresight experts claim that it is not a Black Swan, which I agree as well. Because if we look at this emerging infections in the past 30 years, it is really possible for us to have predicted that there will be, or forecasted that there will be another virus in the coming years. So like for example, the SARS that happened before this COVID-19 and among others. So it's not really Black Swan. But what is the relationship between Black Swan and features thinking? Well, there is, because later on you will know what's the purpose of features thinking. So why features thinking now? Futures thinking has been introduced in many jurisdictions around the world, in the US, in Europe, in Asia, except in the Philippines. Futures thinking is not in the mainstream in the country right now. The very reason why we are introducing futures thinking in the country, because aside from the scholarship issue there, we need also to make this as an advocacy for us so that we have a good feature, a feature that cares for everyone. So Futures thinking has been a concern of many practitioners, management practitioners for the past decades. That's why we have so many books on this one. And also, maybe in the 1980s, as mentioned by Dr. Alex earlier, there were a group of experts who introduced also field features, like field features, what Philippine Future Society in the country. And earlier this morning, I had a good conversation with a former DAP president, Mr. Antonio Calao. He was one of the founders of that Future Society in the country. And he told me that this is a good initiative because you're continuing the gains that they already introduced in the Philippines. And also in the country, there are local efforts as well. So based on our narratives, we have the Philippines A Century Hence by Dr. Jose Rizal. We have the Philippines into the First Century, written by our experts from UP NCEPAG, one of which is Dr. Maria Oliva Domingo. He's also our senior fellow here at Phil Futures. And we also have our Ambition Natin. So it's not really, what to say, it's not really a zero factor now for the Philippines. We have some efforts and we are continuing that. But what is future studies? So futures thinking or future studies, this is a field of study and this is also a practice. And future study is an approach to identifying long-term issues and challenges shaping the future development of a policy area and to exploring their implications for policy development. And futures thinking, as mentioned before during our launching, it's really a process. Why it's a process? Because we need a set of research and modeling tools that policymakers can use to support development of policy that is resilient to a range of possible outcomes. And as you can see on the screen, there are a number of elements of future studies. So that's why this is a tedious process. It's really hard work for us to provide policy foresight responses. So the elements include long-term issues and challenges, its implications to policy development, the future development of policy area, and the use of resilient research and modeling tools. So when we presented our group with Dr. Alex, Dr. Domingo, Prof. Flores, and Dr. Reggie Ugadan, when we presented before the Senate Committee on SDGs, Innovation, and Futures Thinking under the leadership of Senator Pia Cayetano through Sir Noel Patnubay, who is also our officer here at Phil Futures, we agreed that futures thinking must be factual based, but it must have a human dimension. Again, like in public administration, we always ask this question, for whom is public administration? It's for the people. And same thing with futures thinking. That's why this slide shows us the nexus of people, policy, and technology. So technology is there to help us. These are tools for us to be able to craft sound policies for the people. So that's really about intergenerational doctrine responsibility. And also, as futures thinking is anchored on evidence-based work, we need to have right method and right data. So later on, I'll show you what are some of the tools that we're going to use when we do policy foresight. So future studies provides preemptive strategies or alternative counter strategies in order for us to mitigate the failures of intelligence because of bounded rationality. We're limited by our knowledge, limited by time, but if we do future studies or policy foresight, then we can do some preemptive strategies or counter strategies like preventing wars and guaranteeing we can guarantee peace for that. Also, we can prevent poverty and hunger. We can avert oppression and violence and promote social equity. We can prevent environmental degradation and promote conservation of nature. And of course, we'll be able to realize our 17 sustainable development goals. So we have so many targets now to realize in the next few years that will be on 2030, the end of the realization of SDGs. So with futures thinking, this will really help us see how can we realize these SDGs. And Foresight, which is under futures thinking, is a systematic and long-term in-depth study on scientific, technical, economic, environmental, and social processes. So this is the definition given to us by Chen, our Dr. Chen, our colleague from Taiwan, who did a study on civil service regarding the futures of work in the public sector. And Foresight is about the process of anticipation, future probabilities, and options for action. According to European Union's definition, Foresight is systematic. It's participatory, it's future intelligence gathering, and medium to long-term vision building process aimed at present-day decisions and mobilizing joint actions. So what are the benefits of doing Foresight? You will ask, why should I venture into futures thinking or future studies? If I still have, I still have time to study futures thinking, and I'm really doing that. I'm enrolled in several short courses with Sohail Inayatullah and among others, and of course with Anita. She's my mentor for this because I had my first futures thinking or Foresight study with her in Kuala Lumpur, in KL. So these are some of the benefits. It can serve as handles for decision makers and for us, professors and practitioners of public administration. First, leaders can shift their focus towards long-term goals. When we say long-term goals, it's not just about 3 years. No, it's the minimum of 5 to 10 years. So we're looking into futures system. It's really Foresight. Then we can develop a culture of Foresight, as I mentioned earlier. So it's a future system. Then with that, we'll be able to develop or frame sound policies based on right policy question because we're using policy tools. And we can generate new ideas. When we do workshop on policy foresight, we can generate a number of bright ideas in order for us to introduce innovations in the public sector. And lastly, for us to nurture leadership, for us or for me in this paper, it's really focused on phonetic leadership. Why phonetic leadership? What is the correlation or connection of phonetic leadership to foresight? Well, phonetic leadership is about wise leader. At the end of the day, leadership matters in implementing these foresight policy responses. So there are 6 abilities of a phonetic leader. The ability to make a judgment based on goodness. Goodness is about common good. It's about the general welfare of the people, and it's about intergenerational responsibility doctrine. And a wise leader has the ability to grasp the essence, not only to know the meaning of the events, time, and places, but also he has the ability to articulate the essence. He knows how to make narratives in order to communicate policy issues. And he has the ability to create the ba. Ba is a Japanese word which means sharing the same context, and the ability to use political power and to foster phronesis. Phronesis is one of the types of wisdom as informed by Aristotle, and the other 2 include techne or episteme or episteme. So these are the types of wisdom, and phronesis is really about practical knowledge, about experience, and it's values based. So these are some of the tools for gathering intelligence about the future. Now I'm talking about the tools. So these tools are not exclusive. There are so many tools. It will depend on how are you going to approach your problem. So if you want to gather intelligence about the future, you can do horizon scanning, 7 questions, the issues paper, Delphi. Then for exploring the dynamics of change, you can do driving mapping, axis of uncertainty. If you want to describe what the future might be like, you can do scenario planning, visioning, SWOT analysis. For developing and testing policy and strategy, you can do policy testing, backcasting, and road mapping. So now that we are in the 4th industrial revolution, we can do AI. Now we have features, features wheel, features triangle, and a lot, because of Internet of Things. So you can easily identify drivers, trends, and values, and among others. And speaking of drivers, we usually cluster our drivers into V-STEP, no? Values, social, political, legal, economic, and environmental. But within the Philippine context, I see it important to look into the governance reform framework that was introduced earlier by Dr. Alex. And there are 5 handles in here. So if we do Foresight planning, then we can cluster our drivers into 5. First, on institutions, it's political. You can also cluster that into behavior, mindsets, paradigms, citizen engagement, because foresight and futures thinking is participatory, then leadership, specifically phonetic, and then communication. How are we going to communicate our policy responses? And of course, we have words that have been mixed together. So here, for example, globalization, it's a concoction of globalization and local. So we have to take this approach that we have to take the global perspectives. That's why we have so many global experts here in at Futures Thinking. And then we do cooperation and competition as well. But as we always say, we are inclusive. No? We are inclusive at Futures Thinking and also at the Philippine Society for Public Administration and the AP as well. So what we've done so far, well, first, prior to COVID, we had this brainstorming with Celine, our young futurist, including CJ, our program manager at the AP Grad School. We conceptualized this knowledge innovation hub lab. Why hub? Hub is a center, while lab is a laboratory. So it's not only about knowledge products. It is about practical application. That's why we have the laboratory now. So we have policy simulation and among others. That's why it's Hub Lab. And if you see this triangle, it has 7 pillars or 7 platforms. It was created by Celine. And one of the 7 pillars is the Futures Thinking platform. So with that Futures Thinking platform, the committee, the Senate Committee on SDGs, Innovation Futures Thinking, as chaired by Senator Pia and through Sir Noel Patnubay is with us here, we're able to present a framework. And that framework is about this one. It's about SDG, a strategic foresight framework for SDGs. So we incorporated the actors in the policy making arena. Then we have the tools. And then aside from the tools, we have the outputs. We incorporated knowledge co-creation strategy in order for us to produce public services with added value. That's why we have the public value there. And then we have the phonetic leadership, because in order for this framework to steer, to really to make it dynamic, there should be leadership, and specifically it's about phonetic leadership. And these are some of our recommendations during the Senate committee hearing. We would like to institutionalize and sustain future thinking initiatives. And one of which, of course, is the creation of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, or Field Futures, that we are having now. And another is, of course, the annual appropriation for FT initiatives that will go to government offices, like education, for example. Then creation of FT office, or for example, National Institute for Futures Thinking and Governance. It's a proposal. And we need to have a whole of government and whole of society approach to FT because it's very participatory. So what else? We also presented this framework. It's about green education system. So again, we emphasize intergenerational responsibility doctrine. Yesterday, during the oath taking of new lawyers, one of the justices mentioned that we have to observe or promote our intergenerational responsibility. So it's really important. I must say it's imperative for us to look into the intergenerational responsibility doctrine. Okay. So at the graduate school, during COVID time, we presented this policy foresight responses. First, facing the new normal, we recommended some long-term solutions. I'll show it to you later on. And then Dr. Ribalida, our senior fellow, made a policy brief on stockpiling. I'll introduce that later on, while why stockpiling, and then why local matters. So for the long-term initiatives, we proposed for National Food Highway in support of SDG 2, that is zero hunger. We also proposed for, and we are currently crafting e-health training programs along with our medical doctors, public health doctors. And we will soon offer e-health short courses. And we need to establish likewise a central epidemic command center similar to that of Taiwan. We have to treat pandemic like the way we treat disasters. No? So it's recurring, and we have to expect that in the next few years, there will be another pandemic. But of course, we pray that we will not experience again like what we're experiencing right now, but we have to be prepared. So it's really about foresight. And we also propose for iCampus for higher education in support of SDG 4 and the business continuity plan for MSMEs. Okay, so what else? What else? We're going to offer graduate degree programs on futures thinking. That's Master's in Future Studies and Doctor in Future Studies in order for us to enhance our 21st century skills. Okay, so I think this is the last slide of my presentation, and I would like to challenge you, be a futurist. Join our Society of Philippine Futures. Maraming salamat po. Sir Alex. Yeah. Sir Alex, okay. So I'm done. I think the next one is Dr. Reggie. Is Dr. Reggie the next one to present? Okay, Doc Reg. Yeah. Doc Reg will be the one to present, or no? Sir Sherman. Okay, Sir Sherman. Thank you. Okay.
Sherman, you're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, now I have the control. Okay. Yeah, let me just share my screen. So I think host is disabled attendee screen sharing. Can you like unlock that, Celine? Let me, no, I can't still. I'm disabled to screen share. Can you allow me to share my screen, Sinj? Okay, can the host, I'm still locked. I can't share my screen.
Yeah, silly. Sinj, can you unlock the screen share? I think I stopped my screen sharing.
Yeah, but
See?
yeah, still disabled.
Okay. All right. Okay, you can't unlock that one, Sir Sherman?
No, host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Sinj, are you there? Can you unlock, please, the screen sharing?
Yeah, give me a host control.
So the presentation of Sir Sherman is about rewiring the past, right?
Rewiring our perspectives from the world after. Yes. Yeah, I'm still disabled, Dean. I can't share my screen.
Can you hear me, Lisan? Lisan?
Go ahead, Sir Alex.
There you go. Now I can share it. Thank you very much.
Yes, sorry.
I was
Okay.
muted by the host also.
Yeah. So, yeah, let me just move this a bit and play. Okay. Now, okay, so my topic for today is all about us reminding ourselves to mind the future, and the ways by which I will show in a case study how people in organizations can actually rewire their perspectives from the world after. So when I say the world after, I mean that the world that ends as we know it today, in trying to some sort of use that perspective in order for us to make sense and feel what the world could be like from the world after, of course in the context of COVID-19. So, however, before we embark on my piece, which is a 20-minute foresight journey, I would like us to play quickly, okay? So the game is called the Rip Van Winkle exercise. It's not Van Helsing, okay? It's Rip Van Winkle. So I assume most of us here know the legend of Rip Van Winkle, but for those who haven't, or perhaps might have forgotten the history of Rip Van Winkle, I'm gonna refresh you a bit. So the story goes, as told by Washington Irving, an American short story writer. Rip was an easygoing man who spends his time in the village and goes hunting to escape his nagging wife. He was good at helping others, but he was inept in helping himself and his family. Rip Van Winkle is not a lazy man. He is good at hunting and fishing and is willing to do everything for others. But when it comes to his own land and his family, he seems to always have a bad luck. Really unfortunate. For his wife, he was lazy and really just couldn't and unable to help his family. That's Rip Van Winkle. Now Rip has a group. He has a gang. They are called the town's philosophers. They love to muse a lot about things and stuff. So one day, he and together with his crew went to the mountains and reached the peak and met the spirit of Henry Hudson, an English navigator and explorer. They had a chat, and after, Rip and his gang went into a deep slumber. Okay? Then, 20 years later, Rip wakes up and finds that the American Revolution has been won and finds that his wife died. Now, this is the game. Rip Van Winkle awoke in a brave new world. He was really, really confused, doubtful of himself. Where am I? I don't know what this world that I'm in right now. So imagine if you were Rip Van Winkle. This is the game, okay? I would like everyone here who are in this session right now to participate in this game. So this is the task. Imagine you have been asleep for the last 20 years. You know nothing about the world in which you awaken. Somewhat unfairly, you have been asked to guess the current situation regarding the country, Philippines. You've awakened by the year 2040, Philippines 2040. However, to be somewhat more fair, you have been asked somewhat unfairly to guess the current situation, right? And again, to be somewhat more fair, before answering the question that was asked of you by the people in that future, imagine today is 2040. Let's just frame our way of thinking in the now as the year 2040. You are allowed to ask two questions about that world, Philippines 2040. I'm not asking for ideas, I'm asking for questions. One or two questions that you could think of. What are your questions? So please place your questions in the chat box for 2 minutes. I think we can do that for 2 minutes. just simply put your questions on the chat box as I have asked, as what is asked here in this activity, in this game. Okay? So is that okay? For 2 minutes. What are your questions? Okay, and then just to frame it again, imagine you have been asleep for the last 20 years. You know nothing about the world in which you awaken. Somewhat unfairly, you have been asked to guess the current situation regarding the country. To be somewhat more fair, before answering, you are allowed to ask 2 questions. What are these questions? You know, I can see the chat box now, but let's just give ourselves 2 minutes to think about those questions and place it in the chat box. You can put your questions in all caps if you want to. Okay, I need some help here. Sheila, can you help me read at least 1 or 2 or 3 questions from the chat box if we have some questions right now?
Okay, this is a very good question. What is the fastest transport by air at this time?
That's a good question. Any other questions?
Another is, have we paid all our debts?
Okay.
From COVID-19.
That's a brilliant
question.
And
is the Philippines a province of China?
Okay, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's from Eleanor. And did our country achieve ambition natin 2040? That's a good one. And then there is something here. Very cute. Where is my cell phone? We don't know if there is still a cell phone by that time. Where am I? Where am I? Because he was asleep for like.
Okay, well, one last question, please.
Am I still alive?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, let me go back to my
There are a lot of good ones
first
here.
slide.
There are a lot of good ones.
Okay, so this is the journey of my presentation about futures. Now, I would like to emphasize here, and as a futurist myself and as a futurist practitioner, you start studying the future not by jumping into imaginations of what might be or could be like right away. You begin the study of the future by asking questions about the future. Because when you frame, the way you perceive and imagine the future through questions, it gives you an avenue wherein you could actually some sort of question your own assumptions about the future. Now, I would like to start with that, and I'm going to show you how this simple Rip Van Winkle exercise has been used by the United Nations Framework for Climate Change to anticipate probable, desirable futures of a climate-changed world in the 2040. So I'm going to present to you a case study later on. Now, when we started asking those questions, we gave ourselves the opportunity to step back a bit from the information that we are aware of. We gave ourselves, by asking these questions, to rethink, reimagine the possibilities of Philippine futures. This process is what I call experiential questioning. You try to explore the things that are unknown and invisible yet by relying on your own experience, by asking the questions that needs to be asked. So the journey of foresight always begins with a question. And these questions, however, must be big enough that it could help us reframe, reimagine the way we perceive and know the future. Now, we've got some really interesting questions, as was shared a while ago. These are really interesting, wonderful stuff. Inquisitive questions, some noble questions about the country by the year 2040. And if we try to look back on these questions later on, You know, it for me, you know, as a futurist, you know, if you try to unpack this question, will certainly reveal details and narratives of what's plausible, probable, and preferable in the year 2040. However, I assume that the bigger question still needs to be asked. And by asking these bigger questions, also embed in it implies the story that we might tell ourselves in the year 2040. Like the question, am I still alive? Now, these questions are straight up. Some of the questions are idea-driven. Some of the questions are nature-driven. Some, perhaps, I haven't seen them all, could be societal, political, economic, cultural, spiritual questions. Now, if you try to categorize these questions by using, for example, inspect methodology instead of steep or steeple, because in inspect framework, you know, you incorporate culture in the as a driver of change, which is for most, you know, Eurocentric methodologies and frameworks, you know, Eurocentric or Western-centric framework does not include culture as a driver of change. But I disagree with that concept, because for us in the Asia Pacific, for Philippine futurist thinking, I think culture is one of the big drivers of change in the next few years. Again, if you try to categorize this question according to inspect, you know, it will reveal a lot about us, Filipinos, because these are the questions perhaps that we've asked would matter. You know, what matters now in future thinking and study is not actually the information or the data that's available in the Google or in the internet. But what matters really, if you want to reframe the way we think about the future, is to check whether or not, ask ourselves, are we asking the right questions? Not even about being right or wrong about the questions that we've asked, we asked, but rather ask ourselves, are these questions really, you know, the big questions, the questions that could disrupt the way we perceive the future from the now, the present, from the world after. Again, as has been mentioned by Dean Lizan, the purpose of futures thinking is not to predict. But even though to a certain extent, yes, we can predict the future a week from now, a month from now, forecast the future 6 months from now, a year from now, but then it becomes more complex if you try to study the future 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, 500 and 1,000 years. You know, that becomes more complex. But then in future studies, you know, we've got some futurists who really studies in the next 1,000 years, like the Long Noun Foundation in Swahili in Ayatollah, who has been really pushing, you know, the idea that, you know, let's develop the capacity and capability to study the future, you know, in the next 500 years. But then for us, of course, in the Philippines, that we might not have the leisure or the time to do that, because what is really essential as far as we are concerned is perhaps the strategic or the decade or the generational, not necessarily the next 500 years. Now, the purpose of futures thinking, as I've said, is not to predict, but to help you, enable you, empower the agency, you know, increase their capacity to influence the system to effect change. It's not even about scenarios, actually. We've been doing scenarios in the last 10 years, but then futures thinking and practice has evolved over time, because now people in futurists ask, you've got the scenario, so now what? Now, for the UNESCO Global Futures Literacy Project, they're trying to some sort of ap di ante, that we should not limit ourselves to scenario creation, but rather the focus, you know, the most, perhaps, I assume, important way by which we could actually effect change in the future is to enable ourselves individually, institutionally, you know, structurally, or whatever you might call it, develop the capacity to use the future to change and transform today. Again, there's no one single future out there, but there is plural future. But if there is a plural future, how might you make sense different ways of knowing the future, and, you know, embark on an initiative wherein we collectively have a conversation and discuss among ourselves and decide our desirable future. We must have a conversation about that. what really is our desired future. If you try to think, what might the Philippines look like in a better future? What might the Philippines look like in a worse future? What might the Philippines look like in a weird future? Of course, we have a bit of idea about this, but when you do futures thinking, put a group of people, let's just say 100 people in a room and discuss about these questions, you will, through a futures thinking process, create a narrative about the best, worst, and weird stories. But we should not end our practice in that. We have to find a way to integrate what's best in the best, what's best in the worst, and what's best in the weird. And then let's have a conversation about what really is desirable for each and every one of us, the future that we all aspire to. Like asking the question, right? It begins with the question, because questions are not necessarily neutral, but it gives you an idea about people's experiences and possibilities. Now, if I might pitch in to the question that I've asked a while ago using the Rip Van Winkle exercise, is the future colonized? Is the future colonized? Was that future colonized by fear, poverty, sickness, and greed? Was that future merely a continuation or amplification of 2020? Or was that future colonized by Western and Eurocentric concepts of development and progress, which have actually has been our story in the last 30 years? Is the future technology-centric? Are humans still in control? Does culture, ethnicity, or spirituality exist in 2040? Am I now living in a climate-changed world? Is the Philippines resilient enough or better, anti-fragile enough to thrive in a worst case or perhaps best case climate change world? Is democracy, liberalism dead? Am I living in a regenerative or even a vegan society where animals have the right to exist, that they have the legal rights or perhaps the natural right to live like us human beings? Are my children or grandchildren alive? How are they? Are they healthy, happy, sick, or dead? What are our modus operandi? And even more questions. Now, in 2019, together with a bunch of weird futurist friends, we co-facilitated a 5-day workshop of collective intelligence and brainstorming employing UNESCO Global Futures Literacy Laboratory Design and Future IO's moonshot thinking approach that began with a Rip Van Winkle exercise. This project was spearheaded by the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, in partnership, of course, with the other UN agencies, including the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. It brought together 100 visionaries and thought leaders from different parts of the world. The group needed our group needed at least around 3 to 4 months, and even well crammed within a week to finalize the design, to ensure that we can facilitate a critical, interpretive, creative, and imaginative, gamified approach to foresight conversation, to reveal an otherwise dormant assumption about the future. We have assumptions about the future, but then these are dormant if you don't have a space to have a futures conversation like this. One, the intent really is to question our assumptions about the future and embed, deconstruct it, unpack ourselves, and learn from our biases and how these biases inhibit us from imagining alternative and preferred futures. Biases are really strong inhibitors, that prohibits you to actually imagine those things that you haven't thought about. And the idea really is to imagine things that does not exist yet. I think that's the core value of futures thinking, and people must have the capacity and capability to do that, because future studies is really about studying something that does not exist yet. As Jim Dator once said, he said that the future does not exist yet, and there are no such thing as a future data. What we have today as data are those data that we've done, to assess, past experiences and try to extrapolate this into the future. And that is one aspect of future studies. You can call that the business as usual future. Now, the 5 days Futures Literacy and Resilience Frontiers brainstorm explored the futures of food, water, health, nature, and human security. And we've considered this as drivers of change. It's technology-centric, but then, of course, it's a mega driver, like artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, biotechnology, satellite technology, and sustainability issues, which includes indigenous culture and values. So how might this driver of change impact our basic needs by the year 2040? And then we've also included, we've identified the institutions and support systems that you will need, that to enable you to actually create the future that you want, like finance, law and governance, education, values, and human habitat. We gamified it. So some of our friends, tried to develop some games to actually make, the conversation more fun, fruitful, and sincere. So this is a Stranger Futures game wherein participants were given the opportunity or the space to have a conversation to challenge their own assumptions and their biases about the future. And of course, then we do this moonshot thinking approach. It was developed, designed by Google. The idea behind here is you have this methodology which is called moonshot thinking, to enable participants or visionaries or thought leaders, even scientists, to develop technology that are not necessarily expensive, but not cheap. But then again, if you try to upscale this idea, it could create 10 times more impact. No? And this is the process that we designed for at least, a quarter. So we started with questioning the future by using the Rip Van Winkle exercise. Since once we gathered all these questions, we tried to categorize this question, whether it's economic, environmental, social, technological, cultural questions. And then once we categorized these questions, we applied some future thinking tools and methodologies. There are a lot of tools and methodologies, and I would like to point out again that each tools and methodologies in Foresight has its pros and cons, but you have to be some sort of be aware whether or not you're using the tools and methods that can help you actually achieve the objective that you want. So we used some future thinking tools and methods to have a conversation about probable futures, right? And then once the probable futures has been identified, another set of futures thinking tools and methods in order for us to identify the desirable future. Once the desirable future has been achieved, and then you need really good, brilliant writers to write the vision, right? And then once the vision, is obvious, it's clear, and then you need some public policy maker experts to actually unpack this vision and see, what are the cross-cutting policy themes that this vision responds to. And then once the cross-cutting policy themes are identified, and then you have to find ways by which you could actually achieve these cross-cutting objectives. And then, of course, this is a continuum project. Interventions and milestones are very important, in order for you to have some sort of a metric, to ascertain whether or not you're being able to achieve the vision. So this this United Nations Framework for Climate Change Resilience Frontiers project is a 2 years collective intelligence process. You don't do policy or foresight for 1 or 2 workshops. It's a long process. You're talking about long-term future that has an impact in the next 50 years. It must have a good design, and it must be a continuing conversation. And for the UNFCCC, we've done this for almost 2 years. It's ongoing now. And then, of course, it will be followed by an implementation decade, from 2021 to 2030. And this was the result of the workshop, the collective intelligence process that took us for almost 2 years to work on. And these are the new vision for UNFCCC's climate change world, and to make the world more resilient in a climate change. It's no longer climate change, but the climate has changed by 2040. So one is a global change in consciousness towards a nature-first culture that fosters a reconnection to the global ecosystem, which drives individuals and institutions, individuals and societies to assume their responsibility in the stewardship of nature. A global system change translating into new forms of habitat and social and economic practices that enables the continuous regeneration. Now you're talking about regenerative policies here, as a narrative, future narrative that perhaps, we might want to look into and integrate into our conversation, policy conversation later on societies, economies, and ecosystem. And however, this takes place against the backdrop of applied frontier technologies, which is AI, satellite technologies, among others that I've mentioned a while ago, in a retooled financial system, because you need to have a budget. Your financial system must be able to initiate reforms that enable you to actually achieve that particular future. Because if you have this system that doesn't work, then it's really impossible, to achieve this future. But at the same time, equitable access to data becomes a global public good. Now we are in the information social media age. In fact, at the global level, that's the conversation that they've been having. For us to have the power to access our own data, which is apparently not available now. Once you provide your data on Facebook, Facebook owns the data. But then there are other social media networks and hubs that are emerging right now that actually gives you the right to do so. Now, these are the objectives and pathways. These are 3 cross-cutting objectives that respond to the vision, right? Fostering a nature-first global culture to ensure environmental stewardship. Now, let's ask that question. Is that narrative of environmental stewardship embedded in our policy conversation and public policy, in law and governance, in our financial systems, among other things? And then, of course, we need to partner at the global level, retool the global that in order for us to effectively respond to future climate risk and transform sectoral approaches to sustain long-term regenerative resilience. And you have this 8 interrelated pathways. This is the result of the Futures Foresight workshop at the UNFCCC. And I'm just trying to show you here how you can actually use the future to create solid, strategic policies, policy themes, and pathways to achieve the vision, that we perhaps will be able to create later on. Like, as you can see here, transforming humanity's interface with nature. Have we began a conversation that perhaps nature is something that we need to consider now, because that's a major big driver as far as the future is concerned. Building on indigenous values. Now, this is very important. Again, as Anita Kelleher said the last time that we had the conversation about the meaning of futures thinking. Right now, we define futures thinking as the study of so forth and so on. But that definition could change if we use and employ our local languages, to define the future for us indigenously. Like I did that. I'm an Ilocano. I'm from Ilocos Norte. I tried to check the meaning of how futures might change when I translate this to my local language. Like in Ilocano, it's called Masakbayan. And then I've asked the help of a UP Baguio linguistics professor, and we learned later on when we deconstruct the word Masakbayan, we learned that for us Ilocanos, the future is an experiential verb. It is an experience. It's not some sort of a time that is different or the future is far, but rather it is an experience. It is always within us. If you're in Ilocano, you actually embody the future. Now the question is, try to look into your own local dialects or languages, and check what's the future for you. And then of course, I'm not gonna discuss this all of this. I'm gonna give you a copy of this presentation. And let's just try to step back a bit and review whether or not this narratives and themes are missing or perhaps apparent in the policy conversation that we're having at this moment. Now, I would like to leave you these questions. I will end my presentation by asking you these questions to everyone. How might a better, worse, or weird Philippine futures of food, water, health, nature, and security look like, let's say, in 2040 or 2030? What are our desired future as far as food, water, health, nature, and security is concerned? How might a day in the life of a Filipino look like in these desired futures? Weird, worse, better. Anong buhay natin dyan? Anong buhay ng bawat Pilipino? No? And last but not least, if you were to conceptualize, improvise, or invent a moonshot solution, I think that is what we need right now. Once the desirable future is clear, you need to think of perhaps a social technology, political, economic, cultural technology that will help you leapfrog to achieve the desired future. Now, what are the big questions that we need to address? How might you upscale it? So that ends my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sherman, for that very interesting presentation. more than interesting, very, very stimulating presentation. And it does flow very nicely from the discussion of Dr. Lisan, who also located it within the context of our discipline. Most of us here are public administration students or in the discipline. And we talk, I guess the natural home will be in policy analysis, where we learn to ask the question. And I think, Sherman, you asked that. The most important thing is really asking the right questions and look at the question behind the question. And some tools essentially in policy, in public administration policy science would be asking the question, for instance, in terms of using the policy Delphi, etc. So I think that I think we are really moving. We've talked about futures thinking. We've talked about the home perhaps in public ad, but not necessarily public ad, because you said it is really interdisciplinary, right? And thank you for your very nice exercise on the Rip Van Winkle. And sometimes I wonder, Sherman, if 20 years is still too short. You know why? Because 20 years ago, we celebrated the turn of the century. And it seems like just yesterday. And question, not much has changed. So maybe looking beyond, kaya maganda itong ambition natin 2040, will we be able to achieve that? Well, and these are some of the questions. And I'd like to thank our participants who have been sending the right questions. So from Lisan's presentation, Dr. Sherman's presentation, let's now listen to third presentation. I believe it will now be Dr. Reggie Ogadan. By the way, Reggie, like yourself, Sherman is also from the north. He's also an Ilocano, but from the other side. He's from Isabela side. You're from Ilocos side. I'm from the Cordillera side. Pasensya na kayo mga kaibigan. It just so happens that we're from the north, but obviously it's not that. Okay, so let's welcome my good friend, Dr. Reggie Ogadan. Reggie, please.
Yeah, Sir Alex and Dr. Reggie, if I may, I'd like to interrupt. We have with us Dr. Sally Fox. Sir Sherman, would you like to introduce one of our global experts? She's from Australia.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you, Sally, for joining us. Yeah, Sally is a futurist whose expertise is on global public health. Hi, Sally.
Welcome to the Philippines, Doc Sally. Yes, Dr. Reggie, you may proceed now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sir Alex. For my presentation, I'll be talking about the emerging perspectives for public organization. Of course, beyond COVID-19. This is my bias because my research interest is always on public organization. So for today's presentation, I'll try to give a kind of maybe a perspective on what the public organization should look like or should consider, of course, for the future and beyond this COVID-19. Okay. My presentation will go with these three main topics. Maybe we will just again review or take a look on the government, or the battle of the government between versus COVID-19. And second, I'll be presenting to you a study that we did. It's on a study on alternative work arrangement. It's a study conducted in the United States, but I'll try to bring or to give maybe some of the findings or maybe major implications that we can get from this particular study. And actually, we're planning to do the same thing here in the Philippines. And the last topic that I'll be presenting will be, maybe just a discussion, maybe just a conversation on, for us, preparing for an uncertain future. Okay, so maybe just, these are just quick stats. As of yesterday, globally, we almost have 9,300,000 plus cases of confirmed cases of COVID. And as you can see also, the Southeast Asia, we are really going up, right? It's 663. And we still don't know what will happen, what will we expect for tomorrow, right? And just yesterday, of course, the Philippines, we've reached already this part of 33,000 yesterday. And of course, By 4 o'clock, we will be having a new number. I mean, we'll have this new statistics on the total number of cases in our country. It's already 33,000 yesterday, and we expect again to grow. Right? So these are the, as you can see, it's actually our 104th day. The government has been battling, of course, the Filipino citizens are battling the 104th day already this versus this COVID-19. And we already reached this total number of cases. Right? I just did a quick text analysis of different news on the efforts of the Philippine government, and I was able to come up with this graphics, with this word, and you can see that COVID, the Philippine government has been very busy dealing or on combating this pandemic, right? So specifically, as you can see, the government proclaimed, of course, the state of calamity. We have this Bayanihan to Heal as Swan Act. We have lockdowns and travel restrictions from ECQ, MECQ, JCQ to MGCQ, and we still don't know what will be the after June 30. Right? We have this SAP or some cash aids to our citizens, having this mass testing. Now, for example, these mega swabbing centers for repatriation of our OFWs. And we have this program, Balik Probinsya program, that has been, of course, quite a bit, an issue now, right, with the local governments. And of course, the local government initiatives as well. And, the government declared, they reported yesterday that we already have this $5.758 billion of foreign loans just for combating this, as a response to COVID-19. As you can see, the government has been in this period, 104th day, and having all these different initiatives and activities in battling COVID-19. I just showed to you what are these initiatives by the government, but now maybe let me just focus on what the government or what public organizations did, for example, here, or specifically here in the Philippines, in combating the COVID-19. Of course, the alternative work arrangements, right? So the Civil Service Commission of our country, they issued this Memorandum Circular number 10, series of 2020, revising the guidelines for alternative work arrangements and support mechanisms for workers in government during the period of the state of national emergency due to COVID. And they presented some ways, or alternative work schedules or arrangements, like work from home, staggered working hours, the skeletal workforce or skeleton workforce, and also the workday compressed work week. Now, I think one of the issues, of course, for public or organizational studies experts or scholars, we wanted to know whether or not this different alternative work arrangements are really helpful, or are they really contributing to the organizational performance or individual performance, right? Or is it really, or does it give more stress to the civil servants? Right? So let me just give you a quick, maybe a quick review of different literature that went through this argument that work-life policies. Actually, this is part of our study conducted in using data from the United States. The work-life balance policies, of course, they mitigate undesirable employee behavior. For example, we argue tardiness, absenteeism, and work interruptions. And of course, enhance the performance and job satisfaction of employees. This alternative work schedule of arrangements, or maybe you can also see telework, have they're mix of findings. We can see some positive results as well as negative relationship or effects on, for example, organizational performance, and also some negative results on or association with job satisfaction. And some scholars argue that this failure or this kind of negative relationship could possibly be attributed to that such flexible work system or alternative work schedule have not been well implemented in public agencies. So literature also, however, confirms some of the positive aspects of this flexible work systems. For example, there's a positive effect on productivity and costs, also in job performance, employee morale. Some also they link on in job satisfaction, of course, in performance as well, and also some in the employee retention and the overall organizational performance. Okay. We also have this that when you use or we employ this different flexible work systems, as a tool for us to improve organizational productivity and also enhance the morale of the employees. Flexible work systems provide the employees with the right to make some adjustments onto their, of course, changes to their workplace, work hours, and work system based on their, of course, personal or maybe specific circumstances. Employees seem also to be more satisfied when they are granted more rights to, of course, self-control. Maybe you can say it more autonomy. Now, there's some possible theories that you may consider, you may look at when looking at this possible or looking into the relationship of this alternative work systems to possible outcomes. For example, spillover theory that assumes the emotions and behavior, they occur in a single area, despite the physical, mental, or temporal borders. And also conflicts at home could spread into the workplace and vice versa. So that's how spillover theory looks on, or maybe you can use when you explain this flexible work systems. Work-family conflict also, it argues that excessive mental burdens and role ambiguity can occur owing to the role conflict that occurs when an individual is required to cope with contradictory roles at the same time. So, maybe some of our participants now, they are experiencing, of course, if you're working from home, that while you're working, you're also having this work at home, right? So possible, there's some kind of ambiguity, right? So these conflicts can, of course, in turn cause additional problems such as increased turnover rates and possible decreased productivity. Right? Also, one possible theory is the border theory. So monitoring how well the border between the two domains, for example, work and life, right, is managed and coordinated with an optimal balance. So we always call for the WLB, or the work and life balance, right? But of course, when we have this flexible work system, maybe we can have this now, the work-life integration. So the work and life integrated together. So people search also for compromise between these two domains when they consider restrictions rather than appealing to extremes. For example, integrating or separating this work and life domains. One possible theory also that may explain such is that the self-determination theory. Self-determination theory mentions that autonomy is a key factor in motivating employees and satisfying their needs. So such workplace flexibility may possibly reduce the chances or the intention of an employee for turnover, and of course will increase or enhance the job satisfaction. So we also argue that when we have this balancing work family issues, managing work conflict, and when you increase motivation of employees within the organization, that of course would heavily depend on how managers or how the supervisors within the organization or leaders within the organization will effectively use those flexible work systems. And of course, to what extent the employees may perceive this different alternative work arrangements as positive or helpful for them. Now, we developed this model for us just to test whether or not those alternative work schedules or the satisfaction on these alternative work schedules and also the telework satisfaction would contribute to the job satisfaction and turnover intention of the employees. So the findings, maybe I'll just go directly to the findings. The findings provides that it enhances the job satisfaction, and it reduces the turnover intention of the employees. So the higher the satisfaction of the employees on the alternative work system and the telework system reduces or it's negatively related with the turnover intention and positively related to job satisfaction. So as you can see on this findings on the fixed effects, right? But so as you can see here, contemporary organizations, of course, may adopt this workplace or alternative work systems. For example, workplace flexibility by giving their employees more leeway or freedom to choose the place, time, and duration to engage in work-related activities. Also, certain types of reform values may help or may enhance the positive relationship of the work of this alternative work systems towards job satisfaction and turnover intention. So our argument here, there's some important reform values that needs to be that must be in place in a certain organization for us to maximize whatever positive results we can get from alternative work system. Right? For example, here in our study, we identified two reform values, the NPM reform values and the post-NPM reform values. And that the NPM reform values may, of course, include the strategy-oriented and performance-oriented, and the post-NPM reform values may be more on knowledge management-based and social equity. So with this post-NPM reform values, it talks more on democratizing or more of taking care or giving more value to the employees in a certain organization, while the NPM reform values in this particular study, we just focus more into the performance or performance evaluation or performance management in a certain organization. Okay, so the findings, maybe some of the major implications that we want to share with you is that participation in flexible work system, alternative work system is not enough. It's not enough to have a significant or positive influence on job satisfaction and turnover intention. We argue that positive effects occur when employees are satisfied with on the utilization of these flexible work systems. That's the main, I think, the findings that we get from this study. One implication also is that managers should exert great efforts to create an environment that help foster effective flexible work systems. So for example, we may reduce the negative experiences of employees with this alternative work arrangements or schedules or flexible work systems when they cannot, of course, cooperate or communicate well with the others because they do not share the same working hours, or maybe in this other or conducive work-home setup. And maybe you can include also the internet connection, right? One implication also is that managers should implement a flexible work systems with care, as imbalanced application or too much flexibility without consideration of the organizational context or job characteristics that may lead to for of course, an additional problem. So we also push that this alternative work arrangements or flexible work system should be wrapped with the performance-oriented reform values. Of course, here it will effectively, of course, enhance the organizational performance through flexible work systems. Compensation based on performance evaluation should be executed fairly with due process. And the implementation of flexible work systems with impartial rewards can be an effective strategy also to recruit and to retain talents in the public sector. Lastly, on this implication is that, I've mentioned a while ago that the mere presence or the satisfaction on different alternative work system or alternative work arrangements may have more positive relationship to a specific employee behavior when this is coupled with different reform values that we've mentioned a while ago. So flexible work systems are more positively and significantly moderate, or maybe more positive relationship could be taken from it when they go with NPM reform, NPM performance-oriented reform values in the organization. But our findings here, we find out that the post-NPM values of knowledge-based, knowledge management-based, and social equity reform values are not that really contributing much as compared to the NPM reform values. Now, why I discuss those, and in relation to my final topic for this presentation. For me, as an organization studies scholar and a researcher on this particular topic, I think I failed to connect the whatever analysis or studies, or maybe looking deeper into different organizational strategies to a futures thinking perspective, right? So for now, I would like to suggest, or I would like to push more for because of these different changes, right? And of course, what will happen next? Are we going to retract again this alternative work arrangements, or are we going to use them? In the literature, when we look into looking at the future of organization in public organization, in that matter, or any type of organization, they only see three signals. They look at the technology, globalization, and workforce diversity. But we failed to see this pandemic as a source of signal. So when I see it, organizations lose their competitiveness, or even an organization will become obsolete, or when they are complacent toward or ignorant of signals radiating from significant change, impacting the organization or impacting the whole society. maybe you can take a look on the case of, you know, the BlackBerry before, right? That they failed to see what's ahead of them. You know? And I see it also, public sector organization should not be, should not really be complacent, you know, on their position, being the government. Remember that public sector organizations are not the sole deliverer of services now to the citizens. It may reach also a point that it may lose its relevance in delivering public service. So I see it looking more into the signals, and or public sector organization should be able to see what are these signals. And from this particular slide shows, you know, technology, globalization, workforce diversity. But I think there are some signals also, like this pandemic, that can help us design, you know, strategies or what should we expect in the future. So you know, I see it really important to bring this idea of futures thinking in public sector organization. You know? Futures thinking in government agencies should encompass this systems approach to facilitate, you know, these four primary processes. For example, observation and interpretation of signals, the identification of trigger points, or use of foresight to build scenarios and plan action, and translation of scenarios into success. Now, it's not just building scenarios, but of course, translating these scenarios into success. So this is just a kind of an iterative nature of futures thinking that you may see within an organization. Maybe you can think of, I just thought of, you know, what possible scenario, what do we expect after this, this COVID-19? Are we going back to normal? Are we going back to the face-to-face, or I mean, reporting physically to office, or are we going to maintain this, this alternative work system? I mean, possibly we may think of smart work system, you know, as one scenario that we may see in the future of public sector organization. And to end my presentation, I just really like this this drawing here. Now it was drawn by Fortunato Di Piero. It's entitled Skyscrapers and Tunnels, drawn in 1930. If you can just imagine, what's this? What's the condition? You know, I don't know what kind of thinking, or maybe he just thought of the future with this poster. So I'm encouraging also everyone. I think I'm ending it with this one, that, you know, there's a bright future when we have to, when we look on different signals, and we look and we were able to interpret the signals, you know, identify what are these triggering points, and use use of foresight to build scenarios and make these scenarios a success. Thank you very much, Prof. Alex. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reggie. I think there's a natural flow from your discussion, and taking off from what Sherman mentioned about the importance of empowerment. But this time we're talking about an empowered organization. Sherman earlier talked about how to empower. It's not really predicting, but empowering. So really, within the context of how you can have an empowered employees, and with flexibility, empower them, I think it's very, very important, as you mentioned. In fact, at one point, it crossed my mind, maybe at one point, let's do the Sherman's Rip Van Winkle exercise for the office, or Rip Van Winkle exercise for education, which is what Dell will be mentioning, we'll be talking about in a while. Now, if you recall, in our hearings with Senator Pia, she talks about how in the future, we move away from the traditional ways of education and really focus on developing critical thinking among our students, developing creative thinking rather than rote in terms of you know, reading, writing, arithmetic, as they say. What will the curriculum be like in 20 years, perhaps? So it's within this context, perhaps, that our next presenter will be making his presentation. Professor Del Flores. If you recall, Noel de Guia, who is, of course, one of your officers, has always emphasized the importance of futures thinking in education. So it's very important. So let's now listen to Professor Del Flores. As I mentioned, Del is now the Director of the Center for Leadership of the National College of Public Administration, involved right now in a project on futures thinking, setting up a futures thinking office at the Department of Education, and largely to the support of our good, our Senator, Senator De Guia, and Senator Pia, and Noel De Guia, and of course, Secretary Briones. So I'm now calling on a good friend, Del Flores. Are you on board, Del?
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Alex, good friend and mentor to all of us here. And also thank you very much to Dr. Lizan Kalina and Dr. Reggie for inviting me here this afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well, Dr. Del.
Anyway, can somebody help me show the slides? I think I cannot share my screen right now. Maybe the hosts can do that.
Finch, can you assist us in sharing the screen of Sir Del? Okay. Yeah, there we go. Sir Del, can you share it now?
Okay.
You're also
some, yeah. Okay. I'm having some difficulty sharing it. Yeah. Anyway, I sent it to the organizers earlier.
Yeah, Sinch, can you share the screen of Sir Del, please? Okay, yes. So while Celine is fixing the PowerPoint presentation, Sir Alex, there are some questions in our chat box. One is from Annalisa. Can you see it, Sir Alex? Like she's asking about there are some government agencies that require the employees to adopt the work from home scheme, but since they are not allowed to be home, can you see it, Sir Alex?
Yeah, I think the key here really, and this was pointed out by Reggie and also Sherman earlier, the key here is really flexibility, no? Not being tied to the things that we have at this point. Well, and Munoz is talking about, can government be required to give financial assistance to employees or internet connections? I mean, why not? As a matter of fact, I recall I was just talking to Reggie earlier and my other colleague at UP, and they said, if we continue this work from home, there'll be some kind of support to our faculty and students for work from home, including connection to the internet. But I must mention that, we're talking about this internet, but it's a very, very important question in the Philippines today, because as we use the internet to bridge the so-called digital divide, there are areas actually where we're actually widening it. May mga napapag-iwanan. And I think, Sherman, is something that we should look at in a Rip Van Winkle. Will those that have been left behind have coped with the changes? Or, suppose they might even have been further left behind. And I think it's also a possibility, because as you're bridging the divide, there are those who are leaving behind. So it's really bringing in, I think, Reggie mentioned the point of equity. For whom? Equity. In public administration, usually we talk about economy, efficiency, effectiveness, but really a very important question is really equity. Para kanino ba talaga? And I think that's something that should somehow drive our ideology in futures thinking. Well, it's a hackneyed term, people walang iwanan, but how do you do that within the context of two things? Shaping our structures, and the theme for today's discussion, changing our mindsets. I think that's very, very important, which is the theme for today's discussion. So indeed, the changing structures ito at saka mindsets. Okay, are we okay with the next slide, Del? Okay. But,
do you have a copy of my slides?
Yeah, it's okay now. Yeah, we're okay.
Okay. Anyway, good afternoon to our participants. My task this afternoon, as assigned by Dr. Lisan and Dr. Reggie, is to give us a glimpse on how futures thinking can be applied in planning and policymaking in the education sector. And of course, as mentioned by Dr. Brillantes earlier, we are involved in the Education Futures Unit of the Department of Education right now. And we also did some studies with regard to the education sector for the DBM and the DepEd before. Anyway, can you proceed to the next slide? To be able to achieve this goal, I think I would like to focus on 4 key questions. First, with regard to what futures thinking framework can we use in terms of addressing the needs and wants of our society right now? And also the next key question would be, what are the major challenges being faced by the Philippine education sector, as it is our focus this afternoon? And third, how can futures thinking help in achieving the desired future for Philippine education sector? And lastly, maybe we can also think of what's the future of Philippine education. Next slide, please. This is the futures thinking framework presented by Dr. Lisan earlier, but I just made some modifications. I think any planning and policy making tool has to be able to transform information to policy and action effectively. So in terms of coming up with a framework and applying this in planning and policy making in education sector and also in other concerns of our society, we have come up with this framework. Now, when we say futures thinking, we think of also looking into the evidence that is out there. This evidence can come in the form of quantitative data, which can also be in the form of, for example, demographic factors, socioeconomic profiles, which are available in the data being collected and also processed by the government statisticians, for example, the PSA. But also this can be found in what we call the revealed preferences of consumers through consumer data that are being collected by the private sector, the companies, and the corporations. But aside from focusing on quantitative data, it's also important because futures thinking has also evolved, as was mentioned also by our resource speakers earlier, in terms of also making use of what we call qualitative data. So the human dimension or the human factor is also very much important in terms of, for example, looking into the perception or the attitudinal response of the people to government policy, to private sector products and services, for example. And it's also important to look into their aspirations, their needs, and also their impressions of course, our government leaders. So aside from quantitative data in the form of statistics, it is also important to look into, for example, anecdotes, vignettes, and also case studies in terms of, again, coming up with good information for policy making and policy analysis. Now, in terms of this process of translating information to policy and action, it is also important to know who are the actors, the stakeholders, and the components involved in the process. Our framework shows that there are actually four very important factors in futures thinking. First, it would be the people. Second, technology, then policy, and also the environment. In terms of the people component, you would like to know what the people need and wants. What are their aspirations? What are their desires? Because eventually, these aspirations, these desires, the needs of the people are the ones that should be considered by the government in terms of coming up with a policies and plans so that they will be able to achieve or attain or provide these services and also these needs to the people. However, it's also important to look into what is the available technology and what sort of technologies are being developed. In terms of also broadening, and actually sometimes it can also limit, okay, the aspirations, the needs, and the horizons of the people. Technology plays a big role in that. For example, if we know what available science or what available technologies are out there and what would be available in the future, we can dream of, for example, coming up with this particular career or coming up with this particular products eventually. But if our technology, if science is limited or not accessible to our people, then our horizons, the horizons might be much more limited. These aspirations coming from the people and also what the available knowledge on what the available technology is should be able to inform government policy in terms of what they should do and or what terms of policies they be able to implement in the future. But all of these things in this case are also influenced by our environment. Not only the physical environment, we're talking about the nature, for example, the forest for that matter, but also what we call the intangible environment, which are, of course, the set of policies and institutions that are already there. So all of these stakeholders, components, and actors interact with each other, and it's very important to understand the nuances that are involved in each. So this is our proposed, again, framework for futures thinking that we can apply in policy making. Maybe go to the next slide, please. Okay, futures thinking has become more relevant because of the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, we already know that it has brought about dramatic changes to our society and also to our daily lives. In a way, when looking at the future, we can say that the future is no longer what it used to be. So why is this so? For example, before the pandemic, maybe some of our youth, some of our students are thinking of eventually pursuing a career in aviation, tourism, etc. However, we can see that because of this challenge, there are now less opportunities in these industries and also including entertainment, for example, even leisure and even professional sports. So those who are dreaming before of becoming maybe a player in these industries or in pursuing these careers may no longer find it viable as of present. But another perspective that we can take is that the future actually has come too early. For example, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had already been talking about telecommuting. Now we are talking about work from home arrangements. But before, we do not actually use that term. What we use is telecommuting, considering that we also are thinking of pursuing this in terms of responding to the perennial traffic problems of the country. The role of artificial intelligence, for example, and augmented reality are also now becoming more prominent in our daily lives. For example, in terms of providing services, companies now resort to artificial intelligence. And this might also, in a way, lessen some of the career opportunities of our youth. In terms of some technological fields like engineering, for example, they have found out that augmented reality is in a way, a very useful application in terms of also for example, designing infrastructure and also other services. In a way, the COVID-19 pandemic has also highlighted the need to accelerate reforms in our education sector. Whereas before, we thought we can take our time to be able to address this or wait maybe for resources to become available. the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to be able to accelerate these reforms because we need to address the gaps that have been brought about by the pandemic. Another important impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will be the need to re-equip our labor force. So we had been talking about the loss in career opportunities earlier, but given that, of course, our people have to earn their livelihood, have to support their families, and therefore they should be able to re-equip themselves, enable to give them a chance to also participate in the new economy that will be wrought by this post-COVID-19 world. Another important aspect that we have to also consider brought about by the pandemic would be the education of our citizens on the social, political, and ethical ramifications or implications of this pandemic. Of course, we have to focus on essential goods and services like food, for example, alternative ways of transportation. But I think equally important would be also showing our children, our students, how to be able to interact properly with other people, provide them, in a way, answers on questions on what is the meaning of life in that case. So values education, philosophy, ethics, for that matter, would also be important. Anyway, as a side note, I read in the newspapers earlier that GMRC is back in the K-12 curriculum as an intervention by our legislators. And this could not have come in a more opportune time as we, anyway, need this subject to then again help our students adapt and also adjust to the post-pandemic world. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, looking into the future of our education system, given the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is also important for us to be able to look back into what had been the perennial or enduring problems of our education sector. Before we are able to come up with policy suggestions and actions to be able to, again, improve our education system, it is also important for us to be able to address the problems that had been lingering before, because this will allow us or give us more capacity to be able to, again, plan ahead for the future. And I think one of the most important challenge that we have to address in our education system would be the accessibility of education. In the Philippines, there's already almost universal participation in elementary education. You can see that as of 2016, 96.2, we already have a net enrollment rate of 96.2. However, there is some, in a way, this is decreased a little bit in 2018. But with regard to secondary education, this is where we can see that there's still a room for improvement. For example, in terms of participation or enrollment in junior high school, as of 2018, almost 20% of our potential students cannot participate in the education system. Of course, the figure is bigger for the senior high school, where almost half do not have access to the senior high schools. So this is one of the important challenges that we have to address, because COVID-19 might actually make this problem worse in terms of, again, providing access to education. When before, without the pandemic, we already find it difficult to access education, especially at the secondary education level, then the problem now could be, again, worse. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Again, one of the implications of having quite a low secondary education participation rate would be with regard to the quality of jobs or employment that our graduates or our students will be able to access eventually. For example, in the Philippines, we can see in the data that at least for the past few years, our society, economy, and the government had been doing quite a good job in terms of addressing unemployment. Our employment rate is quite high. For example, in July 2019, we have almost a 95% employment rate, and we have decreased the unemployment rate to around 5%. However, the more, I think, important problem of the country with regard to employment would be the rate of underemployment, which had been historically high in the past. However, even underemployment is in a way gradually being addressed by our economy and government. And as of July 2019, we can see that it has already gone down to almost 14%. However, the problem is that after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, again, the unemployment rate has now gone over 15%. Okay? So a lot of jobs had been put on hold, or maybe had been in a way lost permanently because of this COVID-19 challenge. However, one of the more vulnerable sectors, okay, would actually be, of course, those who are in the lower income levels. In the Philippines, we can see that almost 60%, 57.7% of our labor force is employed in the services sector. And under the services sector, one of the bigger groups would be those who are engaged in the wholesale and retail trade subsector and the repair of motor vehicles. Aside from that, we can also include those who are in the pipeline transportation networks, for example, the jeepney drivers, the tricycle drivers, etc. But we can see that these workers are those who are mostly affected by the pandemic. It would show that in the first place, their jobs are actually not that secure already, but this pandemic has showed that they are actually, again, especially vulnerable to these kinds of risks. So when we look at this data, now it goes to show that, again, the implication of access to education, our concerns in the education sector actually spills over to the economy in general. Now, but given that, let's look at other concerns. Again, the more recent ones that have been, of course, brought about by recent events. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, anyway, before we go there, I would also want to emphasize this point. This is data on the sources of patent applications, no? For low and middle income countries. This, in a way, gives us an idea on the amount of innovation going on in our country. If you can look at the figure for the Philippines, in the first place, we have, in a way, lesser patent applications. But also one alarming information would be that most of our patents are actually being filed by non-residents. More than 90% of patent applications in the Philippines are actually being filed by non-Filipinos. So we can see that indigenous innovations, indigenous inventions, in that case, or new products, are actually very scarce in our country. Now, given that this is also one of the things that a better, a more improved education system can also address. For example, if we strengthen science and technology or the STEM courses at the K-12 level, eventually many of these students might be inspired to take up careers in engineering, for example, and also in other fields of science and technology. And this data, innovation data for our country might be able to improve later on. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, now I would like to focus on the more direct challenges that had been brought about by the pandemic. But also, I would like to give another perspective and show that the pandemic has actually also, ironically, given us some opportunities that we can also explore. First, with regard to the challenges. When we look at the current situation, of course, many schools, universities, and also at the lower levels have actually stopped or put on hold their semesters. Some already commenced graduations earlier. But some universities have actually thrived in this situation, especially those who are offering distance education or the online mode of education. Now we can see a lot of course, this is a good example, a lot of webinars, a lot of online courses that are being offered. However, looking into this opportunity, we should also be able to, again, take into consideration what we call the digital divide. This is particularly also important, especially in the rural areas. Of course, we laud and appreciate the efforts of our Department of Education in terms of trying their best to, again, resume school as soon as possible. However, there are also, and we are also aware of the situation that we can no longer, of course, do just face-to-face classes, and the importance of blended learning and distance education and online courses will be very much, in a way, important. But given this, we should know that a lot of Filipinos do not have access to digital equipment, laptops, for example, tablets, and also internet connectivity, such that they might, of course, fail to access the education opportunities being offered through these modes. We can also look into maybe other modes of delivering education. For example, before, correspondence education is actually, in a way, a thing. And they make use not of the internet, but of courier and other types of services. But this, again, also makes important our sense of community in terms of, again, of course, having our teachers reach out to the more, in a way, isolated areas and the more underprivileged students. Now, going to the issue or the concern with regard to our teachers. Many of our teachers have been trained to conduct face-to-face classes. They have, in a way, developed their methodologies and their pedagogies under this mode for a very long time. However, given the new situation, it is important for us to be able to also re-equip them and make them, in a way, more comfortable with the new types of learning delivery modes. But another important consideration would be the role of our parents in terms of also being not only clients, but partners in educating our students or their children, for that matter. Whereas before, the parents might just let teachers do all the education, the teaching for their children. Now, we highlight the role of the parents, given that our children are now learning in the house setup or in the home environment. So in a way, this also provides an opportunity for our parents to have a renewed appreciation of education. Because one of the reasons also why we have low net participation rate in education is that not only because they lack access, but some of the students are actually disinterested in education. And partly this is because of, in a way, also the influence of their parents who might not have that full appreciation on what education can do to their lives. Now, aside from that, those concerns, we can also look into what opportunities are being provided by this situation. Now, as I have mentioned earlier, distance education, online learning is becoming more important. In a way, this also forces our students and also the parents in terms of becoming more comfortable in the use of ICT or information communication technologies, all those gadgets, digital equipments, and also the internet. As they are already using these things, we can at least expect that they will be, in a way, they can easily adapt in terms of coming up with, for example, courses, subjects that deal with ICT and deal with information technology, and all the knowledge and skill demands of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. If in a way they are already using these technologies, then again, that can facilitate and even inspire them in terms of taking up interest in these fields, disciplines. For example, the fourth industrial revolution might, in a way, this is the fusion among physical reality. For example, we now have the Internet of Things, which is a manifestation of this, and its connection and link to digital technology and biotechnology. Maybe I think not a lot of our students right now are thinking of having careers in these fields and disciplines, but as they are being exposed to this, eventually we can hope that this will be some of their aspirations. The interest in science and technology, also in terms of looking for solutions to address the COVID-19 pandemic and its implications to our society and our daily lives, would hopefully also inspire, again, our students to also, again, have a culture of science, technology, and innovation. When we look for solutions to our problems in our country, it is one observation that we just look into what political solutions could be used to address these concerns and problems. But I think it's now equally or perhaps even more important to also look at what are the scientific and technological solutions that we can use to be able to address the problems of our society. Next slide, please.
Dan, can I have a question then? Are we
cannot hear you, Sir Alex.
Are we moving towards our conclusion? Very interesting.
Anyway, I think we're now going to the third question. Again, how can futures thinking in a way contribute to the improvement of our education system? How can we in a way make full use of it in terms of coming up with plans to improve our education system and also coming up with effective education policies? I think Dr. Lisan mentioned earlier that one of the efforts of our government and local efforts to also introduce futures thinking in our society would be the ambition natin 2040. Again, there was a change also of attitudes in this case, whereas before plans are being designed, formulated by technocrats in our government. Now they would like to be informed on what are the aspirations and the desires of our citizens, of the ordinary citizens, especially with regard to the youth. since they will be the ones who are in a way around or at the peak of their powers when 2040 comes. So the ambition natin 2040 is a product of course, NEDA, but also we can say that it's a product of a lot of individuals, those who participated in the FGDs and also in the surveys. And they have come up with these aspirations. For example, they would like their children to receive quality education so that eventually they can, of course, pursue decent jobs and realize their full potentials. And also in terms of course, having a better quality of life, being able to live longer and enjoy a comfortable life upon retirement. These are some of the, again, education-related aspirations in Ambition Natin 2040. But given that, we can also say that we should not stop here. Can I request to go to the next slide, please?
Then, can you hear me?
Okay, this is the futures thinking framework that Dr. Brillantes and our team presented to the Department of Education in terms of, again, using the approach in improving education policy and also our plans to improve our education system. As we all know, our education sector is one of the most studied governance sectors in our country. We should be able to recall that before there has already been the Education Commission report in 1991. There's already this Presidential Commission on Education Reforms in 2000. The UNDP, World Bank, and ADB, all of them have their contributions in terms of studying our education systems, and also the right sizing and reorganization, in a way, efforts of the DBM previously have come up with sector studies of the different education agencies. Now, we should not forget the results of these studies, especially that some of the findings of the Education Commission 30 years ago were still, in a way, the findings of the PISR after 10 years, and a lot of these problems and concerns we can still observe at the present. Now, given that, we should also balance the aspirations of our citizens, the youth, for example, with the wisdom and also the knowledge and experience of our technocrats and the experts, those who are specializing in the education sector. So we should, in a way, also come up with a vision that strikes this balance. Those that have been identified in Ambition Natin 2040, but also the visions of our leaders, the visionaries in our society, in terms of coming up with what we call an ideal education system. And this might eventually take form of our long-term vision for education. Now, studying previous assessments will show us how close or far are we from this vision or from this goal. But also it can give us the knowledge and lessons that we can make use of in terms of, again, making futures thinking or applying it in the education sector. For example, eventually when we provide capability building interventions to our teachers and the other personnel of the DepEd and the schools, we might take into consideration what had been found out before. Dr. Lisan mentioned about spotting black swans, for example, but also we should be able to be aware of what we call the black elephants, or the lingering problems that are present in our education system, and that could have, in a way, a long-term effect on our future. Now, all these things can, in a way, show us how do we, again, achieve our long-term vision, and also give us a way to track the different changes or the evolution or development in the aspirations of our people, so that we can come up with timely, sound, responsive, and education policies and programs.
Yeah.
I'm down to, I think, my last slide.
Yes, Sir Del, kindly wrap up, or this is your last now, because our reactor is about to leave. Yeah, can you hear us? Sir Del, are you about to wrap up your presentation?
I cannot hear you, Dr. Lisan.
Okay.
Can we go to the last slide? Anyway.
Yeah, Sir Del, I have a chat for you. Okay. All right. We'll send you copies. Sir Del, I'm sorry to cut you off because Anita is about to leave by 5. Yeah. So right now, Sir Alex, maybe you can request Anita for her reaction.
Well, thanks, Del. That was great. But I'm sure we will continue this discussion later. But we have a little...
okay, I think there's some technical difficulties. The organizers cannot... I cannot hear the organizers, but then again, I would like to, again, wrap up my discussion with my last point, answering the last key question that we have, in a way, showed earlier at the start of the presentation. Okay. The question is that, what is the future of education for the Philippines? I think the answer to that is that we have to be able to hope for the best. And we have to be able to also hear what the grassroots, our children, and the other stakeholders of education would like to say about this. Because in the end, again, we have to remain optimistic for our children and also for our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Del, for that excellent presentation. Dear friends, we have to go to, we're very lucky actually that we have Dr. Anita Sykes-Kelleher, one of the noted futurists of the world, or global thinkers. She's with us tonight, this evening, and she has to leave, but we're very happy so we can call on Dr. Anita to give us some of her remarks before she moves on. But I know that our other colleague, Dr. Sally Fox, is still with us. But let's listen to Dr. Anita before we wrap up. Thank you, Del, for that very excellent presentation. Colleagues, let's now call on Dr. Anita Sykes-Kelleher. She has to move on, but thank you for your time, Anita. Oh.
Yes. Yeah, Anita, can you switch off? Yeah, all right. Thank you. There you go, Anita.
Okay. All good now?
Good.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you. Okay. Really interesting presentation. So first of all, I would like to call on the participants who are in the chat room. If you learned something from the last couple of hours, go to your reaction button and press the clap button so that the presenters can see that you learned something, and then put a comment in on what you would take away from this session. So while you're doing that, I'm going to quickly run through what I took away from these presentations. They were all, I think, excellent presentations. There's so much detail in there. I'm not sure if I can provide comments to do them justice, but there are some things that stand out in your mind when you're listening to people speak. And so Lisanne's going to definitely take over my job in the future. The rate at which you're learning is just phenomenal. I think you asked a very important question when you asked, can we create our future? And for me, the answer to that is yes. I know that a lot of people don't agree with that, but you can create your future. You don't have to be adopting what other people think your future should be. Obviously, learn as much as you can from what other countries are doing. But ultimately, it's up to the Filipinos to create the Philippines' future. And so that's a big discussion to have there and a great question. The black swan, I have to put the comment in on the black swan. The black swan is our state emblem in Western Australia where I live. And the story began back in London to say that it's something that is almost totally impossible, something that could never happen, because all the swans in England at the time were white. And so they were saying it's as rare as a black swan, you'd never get one. So as the home of the black swan, I have to agree with you. The black elephant is the elephant in the room, and it's one of the many animals that come as part of the zoo of the Futures family. We tend to tackle this in the systems thinking courses, at least I do. And on that note, I think that was something I observed as missing from the discussion so far on methodologies, on approaches, and it may be something that you're already doing and just didn't fit into the timing allowed for these excellent presentations. But if it's, excuse me, pardon me, if systems thinking and mapping is not currently in your repertoire of methodologies for your foresight frameworks, whether that's education, whether that's policy foresight, environmental issues, it has to be in there. The type of systems thinking, that can vary, but there needs to be something that brings together this group of changes and happenings and has an understanding about the wider perspective of what's happening around your topical issue. So if it's education, for example, we talked about stakeholders and so on, how many different types of stakeholders are out there. And education is not just in schools and universities, as I've mentioned before, it's also in non-formal and informal learning settings. It's in the home, it's in your prison services probably. Most prison services have educational programs. So it's kind of looking at what the education ecosystem is and using that kind of systems thinking and mapping processes to pull all of that together to see what capability you already have that could be harnessed in a collective way. These are just thoughts that I've come up on my way through. And I have to say, Lizanne, excellent definitions and explanations. Very impressed. Quick question on the SDGs. Are you going for all of the SDGs, or are you selecting the most relevant? And the reason I ask that is prior to the launch of the SDGs in 2015, I was doing some work with UNESCO as a consultant for UNESCO, leading up to the launch of the SDGs. And one thing we were quite focused on at the time was that we didn't expect every country to take on all 17 of the SDGs, all of the different goals and targets. So it really is up to you to pick out the ones that are most relevant. And I think you may have done that in your presentation. But if not, just a quick question. Moving on to Sherman. I love the thing from Sherman. I'm going to copy that one. One thing that Sherman emphasized, the importance of questions, not just the framing question, the initial question, but questioning your assumptions, questioning the importance of actually asking important questions, the importance of going for the big questions and challenging and questioning what you're presented with. There was a conversation in there as well about stakeholders and empowering agency and so on. I wanted to quickly alert you to, I don't know if you've seen the work of Carol Sanford on regenerative leadership. Carol Sanford, she talks about nature as stakeholder. So generally we have stakeholders as people. We might have the occasional organization that we put in there, but Carol's model says if you put nature in as a stakeholder, you'll get a much more broad approach to what you're trying to do in the context of being in harmony with your environment. So it might be worth having a look at that. And Sherman talked us through a futures thinking process, which was really useful. And I hope the participants actually, yeah, great. I'm looking at the comments. They've got it. They've got it. Dr. Reggie, loved it. Really interesting. And I think all of us can relate to the working from home, the different impacts and effects it has on people and their well-being and their health and their finances, and the challenges that your country faces. I loved some of your conclusions, and I guess the question that came out of it for me was, should we keep this going? We talk about post-COVID-19, and that's another point I'm going to make in a minute. But your view is that we should keep the flexible working arrangement. I tend to agree as a flexi worker myself, but I think from the findings of your study, there are more positives than negatives. And that being the case, it's worth pursuing it and getting it right, as you mentioned, with the managers getting it right in the organization and getting the systems right. Work and life, and I hear this a lot. People talk about work-life balance. And my provocative question, I guess, or statement to this, for me, there's no such thing. This is about life balance, because most of us have to work as part of our lives. So for me, there's no divide. And this is a very common term, Dr. Reggie, I know, and it's used quite widely, but I like to sort of reframe it a little bit and just sort of say, this is about a balanced life, and having work as an important part of that balanced life. Very important points you made about government organisations, public services not becoming complacent, the risk of becoming irrelevant if they are out of touch with what's happening in the external environment. So the need to pick up some of these futures thinking skills and methodologies, integrate them into policy and planning procedures, risk management, other organisational processes that are already there will help them to do just that, I believe. Okay, so I'll move on to Professor Dell, and thank you very much. Very interesting listening to someone else talk about education. Years ago, that was my first set of scenarios, was the future of our state's education system. It's such a challenge, I think, in particular. I'm listening to you talking about senior high school and those rates of participation in senior high school. And obviously that's going to have an effect on those young people for the rest of their lives. Their education, or lack of it, can be passed on to their children and their grandchildren. So there are intergenerational considerations there. I was looking at this, and this is a question because I don't know your system well enough to know the answer. Is senior high school optional and not compulsory? Because of very, very low rates of participation at senior high school. And Professor Dell mentioned about access to senior high schools. Some people don't have access to it. So again, mapping the broader education system and looking at where the gaps are and how you can plug those. Digital divide we've spoken about before. And of course, in a pandemic situation or a disaster situation, the digital divide really comes to the fore, because you get to find out who doesn't get to hear about the natural disasters until it's too late or respond to them, who can't access basic services, who can't pay their bills online. So it's not just children. I think that's important. I think it's also our most vulnerable and elderly citizens who have never grown up with these technologies that are excluded from participation in society because of their lack of access to the technology, but also these skills to use it well. I was really quite shocked when Professor Dell talked about over 90% of the patents in the Philippines are from overseas applicants. I think the figure was 93%. Clearly, there's a need to educate more people in how to innovate, how to create and develop new products and services, thinking outside of the box, which futures thinking can help with. But I'm asking the question too, is it just about education, or is the system of innovation, which the government may have some control over, the system that supports or doesn't support innovation, also need to be looked at to see where the weaknesses are and where that can be propped up to help build that innovative capacity. My experience, and limited experience that it is in working with people from the Philippines, is that there's an incredible amount of creativity and great ideas from the people I've met and worked with. So I'm wondering why so few of them are actually getting up into getting investment for scaling and being supported. So I think there's a big question to be asked there. I know that you're also pushed for time and you have other things that you need to be doing. One last point I would like to make. The whole session today talks about post-COVID-19. So I'd like to pose another scenario to you, is that there might not be a beyond COVID-19. COVID-19 may be here to stay. It may mutate, it may weaken, it may come and go like the flu, but we may be living with this now for the foreseeable future. We don't know, but we might be. And so I would be looking at that and thinking, how do we learn to live with it? How do we innovate and create new things in that context? So I'm going to leave it there so that you can move on to your last speaker. But thank you very much. It has been so interesting listening to you all. And I look forward to meeting you when I finally can get to the Philippines, when I'm allowed out of Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anita. Thank you for those incredibly sharp comments, and certainly very, very provocative and quite insightful, but most important, inspiring, encouraging us to continue our work. Thank you very much. As we say in the Philippines, maraming salamat. So as we move on, thank you for those comments. We're very happy, Dr. Anita, and of course, Dr. Sally, that you were with us. And I know Dr. Sally will still be with us. But I think we're moving now towards the end of our discussions. Can I call on Lisan to say a few words?
Yes, Sir Alex, I'd like to get a few words from Dr. Sally. Dr. Sally?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Sally, are you there?
Yes, I am. I think you're unmuted. Thank you very much. Just wanting to say hello to everyone. I'm really interested in the working from home question, and a lot of debate, of course, about whether it entrenches existing inequalities, particularly gender inequalities. I'm working up in my attic and have some difficulties even just getting onto video-based discussions. But, you know, that's the least of some people's worries. So I think there's so many dimensions of some of the questions that COVID has raised for us that scenario work in particular can help us explore. And, you know, what I've seen certainly with many of the webinars that I've been on is that futures thinking has really prompted people to become much more acutely aware of existing conditions, let alone opportunities to think through positive and very optimistic future scenarios. So I think tonight's discussion, tonight from where I am, has been really informative. I, you know, spent a lot of time in the Philippines, so I'm very interested in the debates that this field of work is generating in the Philippines. So congratulations to everyone, and really terrific summary, Anita, I thought, of the presentations tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. And really, we look forward to seeing you again when you do come back. Dear friends, as we're all listening, our colleague Sheila Castillo has been very, very active responding to your comments on chat. So maraming salamat, Sheila. Incredible responses. But please,
thank you, Dr. Alex.
I know there are some questions about the presentations being uploaded. Of course, it depends on our speakers. But I know that Dr. Lisan is present together with Sherman will have something on this. But certainly, even as a useful educational tool for many of us who are teaching, I think this is really incredible. So I think if there are any final questions, but anyway, if there are any take-homes here, I think one taking off from Sherman, it's really all about empowerment. It's not predicting, but empowering us. It's about flexibility. You talk about the importance of autonomy, and people talk about challenging existing paradigms, questioning, look at the question behind the question. There's just so much, I think, that we can take home here, including the current situation. I think Anita's question was really incredible. What if there's no post-COVID? What if we are where we are now? And I think we should really be aware of those. So these are certain things that we should learn to have a grasp of reality with. Remember at the beginning, I talked about the characteristics of a future thinker, one of which is somebody who's able to grasp the reality yet. I would say Hill Santos talks about the importance of optimism, etc. So it's been an incredible session. I congratulate the Futures Thinking Society, Dr. Lisan, and your officers, and our very, very kind and brilliant young colleagues. I say young because they're so much younger than many of us, but that really gives us hope for the future. Okay? So Lisan, shall I turn the over to you? Maraming salamat kay Noel. Noel, you've been very quiet, but Noel de Guia, who's also been an officer of the group.
Thank you, Sir Alex.
So thank you very much, Sir Alex. Thank you so much, Sir Alex, and to our international experts, Dr. Anita and Dr. Sally. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, to our participants who've been very supportive to our webinars in the past and for the forthcoming webinars that we'll have, because I know we will continue our features conversation. I know you have so many questions, but we will prepare another platform for you wherein we can really have a group study, no? A study group, and similar to bus sessions. So before we go, I'd like to request all of you to kindly switch on your video for a group photo.
And even as we're doing that, I think we should try to do the Van Winkle exercise.
Yeah.
Yes. So who will take the picture? I think Celine will. Celine, are you ready?
Yes, on my count. 1, 2, 3, smile.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Mabuhay kayo.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
I thank you, Dr. Eugene. Thank you.